My name is Catherine, and for 34 years, my family has looked at me and seen a disappointment. I'm the quiet one, the odd one, the girl who traded a promising academic future for dirt-stained fingernails and the company of bees. They saw a worthless plot of land, slowly returning to wild, and a daughter who had amounted to nothing more than a keeper of insects. They had no idea that tonight they were coming to my home, to the heart of my supposed failure, to beg me for a miracle they didn't even know I held. They thought they were ending a chapter, closing the book on the family farm and my strange, pointless life. But they were about to find out that my story, the one they never bothered to read, was the very one they were desperate to be a part of. Before I reveal how my sister, the star attorney, and her billionaire CEO ended up utterly speechless in my rustic kitchen, I want to welcome you. Please let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. It means so much to know we're all connected in this space. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your passion dismissed as a silly hobby, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. For all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes the quietest voices have the most powerful things to say. The farm wasn't just land to me, it was a living, breathing extension of the only two people who had ever truly seen me: my grandparents, Thomas and Eliza. They were the ones who had first placed a tiny, buzzing honeybee into the palm of my hand, teaching me not to fear its power, but to respect it. Everything in nature has a purpose, Catherine, my grandfather used to say, his voice a low rumble like the thunder that rolled over our valley in late summer. Even the smallest creatures carry the biggest secrets. He had built the farmhouse with his own hands, the sturdy oak beams smelling of conviction and sweet pipe tobacco. My grandmother had planted the sprawling gardens, a chaotic masterpiece of wildflowers and herbs that hummed with life, a stark contrast to the rigidly manicured lawns of my parents' suburban home. To them, the farm was a legacy of love and hard work. To my parents, it was an asset. To my sister, it was an obstacle. I spent my childhood chasing butterflies through fields of clover while my older sister, Eleanor, spent hers chasing accolades. She was 2 years older, 1,000 years more polished. While I was content with the quiet company of books and the intricate societies of my beehives, Eleanor was collecting debate team trophies, academic awards, and the unwavering approval of our parents. They adored her ambition, her sharp, tailored mind that fit so perfectly into the world they understood. They would watch her at the dinner table, recounting her latest victory in mock trial, their faces glowing with a pride that was always tinged with a faint, apologetic glance in my direction. I wasn't a problem, not exactly. I was just a puzzle they had no interest in solving. I was quiet, my grades were good but not spectacular, and my passions were deemed eccentric. "Still playing with your bugs, Cat?" Eleanor would ask, the nickname a casual flick of dismissal. My parents would just sigh, a sound that carried the weight of their unfulfilled expectations. The real chasm opened the day my grandparents' will was read. I was 22, just out of university with a degree in biology that my parents had hoped would lead to a respectable, lab coat-wearing career in the city. We all sat in a stuffy lawyer's office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and false sympathy. My parents and Eleanor were calm, expectant. They assumed the farm, the last significant piece of the family estate, would go into a trust to be managed by my father and eventually sold for a handsome profit. The lawyer, a kind old man named Mr. Hemlock who had known my grandparents for 50 years, cleared his throat and read the final provision. "And to my beloved granddaughter, Catherine Thorne," he read, his voice clear and steady. "I leave the entirety of the Thorne family farm, its structures, and all its contents, with the deepest faith that she alone understands its true value and will be its faithful steward. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. I remember the distinct sound of my mother's teacup clattering against its saucer. Eleanor's face, usually a mask of cool composure, was a canvas of pure shock. My father's jaw was set so tight, a muscle pulsed violently in his cheek. "That can't be right," my mother whispered, looking at the lawyer as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake, Margaret," Mr. Hemlock said gently. "Thomas and Eliza were very clear. They signed the final codicil 6 months ago." "She must have manipulated them," Eleanor blurted out, her voice sharp with accusation. She turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "What did you do, Kat?" "What did you say to them? They were old. They were confused." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and venomous. I felt my face flush with a heat that was part shame, part fury. I hadn't done anything but love them. I had spent weekends at the farm, helping my grandmother with her gardens when her back grew stiff, listening to my grandfather's stories on the porch swing. I had talked to them about my research, about the incredible complexity of bee venom peptides, and their eyes had lit up with genuine interest, not the polite, vacant stare I received from my parents. "She can't manage a farm," my father stated, his voice flat and final, as if he were discussing a failing business, not his own daughter. "What's she going to do with it? Let it all go to ruin?" That day, the lines were drawn. They didn't see a cherished inheritance. They saw a squandered opportunity. They didn't see a granddaughter who had been loved and trusted. They saw a usurper, a strange, quiet girl who had somehow cheated them out of what they believed was rightfully theirs. And in their eyes, I saw my future laid out before me, a constant battle to justify my own existence, to defend the one place on earth that felt like home. I walked out of that office not with the joy of an inheritance, but with the heavy armor of a custodian who would have to guard her sanctuary from her own family. The farm was mine, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that they would never stop trying to take it away. For 12 years, I held them at bay. I poured every penny I had, and the modest life insurance my grandparents left me, into the farm. I repaired the old barn, turning a section of it into a small but functional research lab. I expanded the apiaries, my colonies of bees growing from a dozen hives to over 200. The work was hard, relentless, and often lonely. But it was mine. The low, constant hum of the hives was the soundtrack to my life, a soothing vibration that centered me. In the city, my sister was climbing the corporate ladder, becoming a high-powered attorney for a massive biotech corporation called Omnigen. Her life was a series of sleek, glass-walled offices, expensive dinners, and victories in the courtroom. Mine was a cycle of seasons, marked by the first bloom of the black locust trees and the final harvest of goldenrod honey. We were living in different universes. The pressure to sell was a constant, low-grade fever. It came in waves, usually coinciding with a dip in the agricultural market or a major repair I had to make. "You see, Catherine," my father would say over the phone, "it's a money pit. You're working yourself to the bone for nothing." They never visited. In their minds, the farm was a symbol of my stubborn refusal to grow up, to be normal. Then, about 6 months ago, the nature of the pressure changed. It became more focused, more aggressive. It started with a phone call from Eleanor. It was a Tuesday morning. I was inspecting Hive 117, a particularly robust colony that was the cornerstone of my research. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my bee suit, and I saw her name flash on the screen. I almost ignored it. Calls from Eleanor were rarely pleasant. "Hello, Eleanor," I answered, my voice slightly muffled by the protective veil. "Kat, thank God. I've been trying you," she said, her voice laced with that familiar, impatient energy. "Listen, We need to talk. Seriously this time. Mom and Dad are beside themselves with worry about you. I could almost hear the script she was reading from. The concerned sister act was a classic opener. I'm fine, Eleanor. The bees are thriving. Bees, she scoffed, a little puff of sound down the line. Catherine, this isn't about your hobby. This is about your future. The farm is a burden, you know it is. But I have a solution, a real one. My company, OmniGen, is looking to expand its agricultural research division. They're scouting locations for a new facility. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. And you suggested the farm? Of course I did. It's perfect. The location is ideal, and it would be a way to set you up for life. They'd pay you more money than you've ever dreamed of. You could buy a beautiful condo downtown, travel, do whatever you want. You wouldn't have to worry about fixing leaky roofs or getting stung ever again. Her words were meant to sound like a lifeline, but they felt like a cage. She was describing her idea of a perfect life, not mine. The thought of being sealed in a condo, surrounded by concrete and noise, made my skin crawl. The farm isn't for sale, Eleanor. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, her patience already wearing thin. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't throw it away because of some sentimental attachment to a pile of rotting wood and dirt. Think about it. Really think about it. I'll have some preliminary materials sent over. She hung up before I could reply. I stood there for a long moment, the angry buzzing of the hive I'd disturbed mirroring the turmoil in my own head. She didn't see a home, a sanctuary, a place of discovery. She saw rotting wood and dirt, a problem to be solved with a checkbook. It was then I understood this wasn't just a casual suggestion. This was the beginning of a campaign. A few weeks later, my mother called. Catherine, darling, it's for dinner, this Saturday, just us. We miss you. Her voice was sweet, a little too sweet. My internal alarms went off immediately, but refusing would only lead to a torrent of guilt-laden voicemails. So I agreed. I drove the 90 minutes to their sterile, beige house in the suburbs, a knot of apprehension in my gut. The moment I walked in, I knew I'd walked into an ambush. Eleanor was there, perched on a cream-colored sofa, looking sleek and predatory in a silk blouse. On the polished coffee table in front of her was a thick, glossy brochure with the OmniGen logo emblazoned on the front. Catherine, so glad you could make it, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. My father steered me into the living room, his hand on my back, a little too firm. Eleanor was just telling us about this incredible project at her company. For the next hour, they tag-teamed me. Eleanor laid out the vision, her voice smooth and persuasive as she described the OmniGen Center for Advanced Agricultural Studies. They would tear down the old barn, of course. The farmhouse would have to go too, to make way for the main administrative building. They showed me architectural renderings of sleek silver buildings and perfectly landscaped grounds, an alien world superimposed on the rolling hills and familiar woods of my home. My mother chimed in with soft, cooing remarks about how wonderful it would be. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing, darling. Eleanor's company would handle everything. You'd be free. Free. It was a word they used a lot. They seemed to think I was imprisoned by the very things that gave my life meaning. I listened, my hands clenched in my lap, my silence mistaken for compliance. I felt myself shrinking, becoming that small, invisible girl at the dinner table all over again. It's for the best, Catherine, my father said, his voice taking on a tone of finality. It's time to be realistic. This farming thing was a nice little phase, but it's time to move on. It's not a phase, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression turning from persuasive to pitying. Cat, look at yourself. Your hands are calloused. You always smell faintly of smoke and something earthy. This isn't the life we wanted for you. That was it. The little comment, so casual, so dismissive, was the spark that lit the kindling of my anger. The life you wanted for me? I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is my life, and I'm not selling my home so your company can pave over my grandparents' legacy. The atmosphere in the room shattered. My mother gasped. My father's face darkened. "You're being selfish," my mother cried, her voice rising. "Eleanor is trying to help you, to give you a future, and you're throwing it back in her face after all she's done." "What she's done is try to turn my home into a corporate asset," I retorted, my voice shaking. "You don't get it. None of you do. You've never even tried." I fled after that, driving back to the farm with tears of rage and hurt blurring the taillights on the highway. I stormed into my lab in the barn, the clean, sterile scent a balm to my frayed nerves. And I looked at my work, my real work, the work they knew nothing about. For 8 years, I hadn't just been keeping bees. I had been conducting serious, methodical research. It had started as a fascination with the intricate communication of the hive, but it had evolved into a deep dive into the biochemistry of bee venom. Most people think of bee venom as a simple toxin, a painful annoyance. But it's a universe of complex proteins, peptides, and enzymes. I had become obsessed with one peptide in particular, a small, elegant molecule I first isolated from the venom of my most resilient colony, the one in hive 117. This peptide, which I named Apis 117, had astonishing properties. In my preliminary in vitro tests, conducted with cell cultures I ordered with my own money, it demonstrated an uncanny ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. More than that, it seemed to act as a scaffold promoting the regeneration of damaged myelin sheaths, the protective coating around nerve cells. The implications were staggering. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it showed the potential to halt and perhaps even partially reverse the debilitating damage of neurological diseases like multiple sclerosis and ALS. It was the kind of discovery that major pharmaceutical companies spent billions trying to find, and I had found it here, in my barn, with secondhand equipment and a relentless, burning curiosity. No one knew. Not my family, certainly. The only person I had confided in was Dr. Anya Sharma, my former professor and mentor from university. She was a brilliant biochemist who had seen the spark in me that my family had missed. She had been my quiet champion for years, reading my research papers, offering advice, and urging me to protect my work. After the disastrous family dinner, I called her, my voice still trembling. I told her everything, about OmniGen, about Eleanor's offer, about the ambush. She listened patiently, without interruption. "Catherine," she said when I was finished, her voice a firm anchor in my sea of turmoil. "Breathe. What you have discovered is monumental. They don't see you. They see an asset they can't control. Do not let them take this from you or the work that came from it." "They think I'm a joke, Anya," I whispered. "A crazy bee lady living in the past." "Let them," she said, a hint of steel in her tone. "Their ignorance is your shield. Now, about the patent. Have you heard from the university office?" Months earlier, on Anya's advice, we had filed for a patent. We did it anonymously, routing the application through the university's technology transfer office to create a firewall. The patent was designated simply C117 Apis. C for Catherine, 117 for the hive, and Apis, the Latin word for bee. It was my secret signature on a discovery that could change the world. "I haven't checked my email today," I admitted. "Check it," she urged. "There has been unprecedented interest from several big players since the application was published. They're all scrambling to find the inventor. One company has been particularly aggressive, a firm called OmniGen." I felt the air leave my lungs. OmniGen. My sister's company. The same company that was trying to buy my land for a pittance was simultaneously, desperately, trying to find the anonymous inventor of the very breakthrough that had been discovered on that land. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, I almost laughed. My family was trying to bulldoze a gold mine because they were convinced it was a barren field, and they wanted me, the failure, to hand them the shovel. The weeks that followed were a siege. The initial soft-sell approach from Eleanor was replaced by a strategy of relentless, escalating pressure. The phone calls became a daily torment. Sometimes it was Eleanor, her voice sharp and corporate, outlining the finality of their offer. Other times it was my mother, her tone dripping with disappointment and weaponized sorrow. "Catherine, your father's blood pressure is through the roof. This stress is not good for him. All this over a piece of dirt. Eleanor is just trying to secure your future. Why must you be so difficult, so ungrateful?" Ungrateful, the word echoed in my mind. Ungrateful for what? For their attempt to erase my life, to monetize my home, to pave over my grandparents' memory? The guilt they tried to shovel onto me was heavy, but my anger was beginning to act as a bulwark against it. They weren't concerned for me. They were frustrated by me. I was a loose end, a stubborn variable in their tidy equation. Then came the emails. Formal, numbered offers from Eleanor's OmniGen address, each one slightly higher than the last, but still laughably low for a parcel of land its size, let alone its potential. They were designed to look impressive, official, to make me feel small and out of my depth. I ignored them, deleting each one without a reply. My silence seemed to infuriate them more than any argument could have. One afternoon, a dust cloud on the long gravel driveway announced an impending assault. My parents' silver sedan, a car that hadn't been up this road in at least 5 years, crunched to a halt in front of the farmhouse. They got out, looking around with expressions of profound distaste, as if they were tourists who had taken a wrong turn into a slum. "Catherine," my mother said, her voice tight as she took in the sight of a patch of wildflowers I'd let grow for the native pollinators. "We were in the area." A lie so transparent it was insulting, they didn't come inside. Instead, they conducted a slow, critical tour of the property, my father pointing out every perceived flaw. "Look at this rust on the gutter," he'd say, shaking his head. "The main fence line is falling apart. This place is a constant drain, honey. Can't you see that?" He tried to shift tactics from criticism to paternal concern, putting a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt foreign, misplaced. "Honey, we just want you to be secure. A big payout from OmniGen. Think of it. You could buy a nice condo in the city, close to us. You could travel. You wouldn't have to live like this." "Live like what, Dad?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I looked down at my hands, at the dirt under my nails and the faint scar from a recent sting. I looked at the hives, shimmering in the afternoon sun. "I like my life. I'm happy here." My mother let out a sigh that was a masterpiece of pity and exasperation. "Oh, darling," she said, as if speaking to a child. "This isn't a life. It's a hobby that's gotten out of control. It's time to grow up." That was the moment something inside me fractured for good. The quiet hurt I'd carried for decades began to harden into something else, something cold and sharp. They didn't just misunderstand me. They were incapable of seeing me at all. They looked at me and saw a reflection of their own disappointment. I simply stood there, letting their words wash over me, and for the first time, the words had no power. They were just noise, like the wind rattling a loose shutter. They left a short while later, their frustration palpable, leaving behind a silence that felt clean and absolute. A week after their visit, the final escalation arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier, bearing the logo of a prestigious law firm in the city. Inside was a formal letter, not from Eleanor, but from a senior partner at the firm, acting on behalf of Omnigen. The language was cold, dense with legalese. It hinted at a full title search, questioning my stewardship of the land and its potential impact on regional agricultural values. It even cited a vague, non-existent family agreement from years ago about the land's eventual commercial development. It was a complete and utter bluff, a piece of corporate intimidation designed to scare a simple farm girl into submission. And for a moment, it almost worked. Reading the dense, threatening paragraphs, I felt a wave of panic. They were bringing the full weight of their world down on me. The world of lawyers, contracts, and power plays. A world where I was hopelessly outmatched. The walls felt like they were closing in. The peaceful hum of the farm was drowned out by the roaring in my ears. I sank onto a stool in my lab, the letter trembling in my hand. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was easier to just give in, to take the money and disappear, to let them have their victory. The fight was exhausting me, wearing me down to a nub. I sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at the sterile white countertops, the ghost of my family's judgment whispering in my ear. You can't win. You're not smart enough. You're not strong enough. I closed my eyes, feeling the burn of unshed tears. Then my laptop, sitting on the workbench, chimed with the arrival of a new email. My first instinct was to ignore it, assuming it was another volley in their war of attrition. But something made me open it. The sender was Dr. Sharma. The subject line was in all caps, URGENTLICENSINGQUIRYFORC117APIS. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked it open. It was a forwarded message from the university's head of technology transfer. Dr. Sharma, the email began, following up on our conversation. The interest in patent C117 APIS has reached a fever pitch. Specifically, the legal team from Omnigen Corporation has been in contact almost daily. They have submitted a formal preliminary licensing offer that is, frankly, staggering for a compound at this stage of research. They are proposing a 7-figure upfront payment for exclusive rights, plus significant royalty percentages and full funding for all future clinical trials. Their internal memos, which their lawyers rather foolishly attached, describe the patent as potentially the most significant neurological breakthrough of the decade and the missing key to our entire neuroregeneration program. They are, to put it mildly, desperate. They are pressing for an immediate meeting with the inventor. Please advise on how the anonymous party wishes to proceed. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes. Staggering. Most significant breakthrough of the decade. Desperate. The fear that had been strangling me moments before receded, replaced by a wave of icy, clarifying rage. They weren't just trying to bully me. They were trying to bully me while simultaneously preparing to pay a king's ransom for the very work I was doing in the barn they wanted to tear down, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it, the condescension, the utter blindness. The despair I had felt vanished, burned away by a cold, quiet fire. The steel didn't just enter my spine. It was forged there, in that moment, in the crucible of their hypocrisy. I was no longer the victim. I was the one holding all the cards. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up my phone. I didn't call Eleanor. I sent her a text, a medium she favored for its brevity and emotional distance. My message was short, devoid of any of the pleading or anger she expected. Fine, I wrote. You win. Come to the farm tonight. Bring your CEO. Bring your final offer. We'll settle this once and for all. Her reply came back almost instantly. A single, triumphant sentence. Excellent. Knew you'd see reason. We'll be there at 7. I could feel the smug condescension radiating from the screen. She thought I was surrendering. She had no idea I was setting the stage for her execution. The rest of the day passed in a haze of focused preparation. I wasn't just cleaning the house, I was preparing a battlefield. I scrubbed the old pine floors until they gleamed. I polished the oak dining table my grandfather had built, the same table where my family had shared holiday meals in happier times. I went out to my garden and picked fresh vegetables: zucchini, tomatoes, bell peppers. I prepared a simple rustic meal: honey-glazed chicken using honey from Hive 117, roasted potatoes, and a fresh salad. It was a symbolic act, a final communion with the life they were so eager to destroy. It was the food of the farm, of my work, of my soul. I wanted them to eat it. I wanted them to taste their own ignorance. My final preparation was the most important. I went to my lab, logged into my email, and printed a clean, crisp copy of the licensing inquiry from OmniGen. I didn't print my correspondence with Dr. Sharma or any of my own research notes, just the cold, hard proof of their desperation, written by their own people. I placed the single sheet of paper into a simple manila folder and set it on the sideboard in the dining room, next to the salt and pepper shakers. A quiet little bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. The house was quiet, the food was in the oven, and I was ready. For the first time in a very long time, I felt no fear, only a profound and unsettling calm. At precisely 7 o'clock, the headlights of a sleek, black European sedan sliced through the twilight, casting long, distorted shadows across the yard. The car was so out of place here, it looked like a spaceship had landed. The engine purred with an expensive, restrained power before cutting out, leaving an almost profane silence in its wake. 2 doors opened and closed with a solid, satisfying thud. I watched from the kitchen window as my sister, Eleanor, emerged, a vision of corporate power in a razor-sharp, navy blue pantsuit. Beside her was a man I recognized from business magazines, Marcus Davies, the CEO of OmniGen. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated an aura of effortless, predatory charisma. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my tractor, and his eyes scanned the property with a quick, appraising glance, the look of a man who sees everything in terms of its acquisition value. They walked up the stone path, their expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. Eleanor's stride was triumphant, the walk of a conqueror returning to claim her prize. Davies's was smooth and confident. They looked utterly alien against the backdrop of my rambling, slightly crooked porch and the climbing roses my grandmother had planted 50 years ago. I took a deep, steadying breath and opened the door before they could knock. "Eleanor, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice even. "Welcome." "Catherine," Eleanor said, a tight, victorious smile playing on her lips. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the clean but simple interior with a flicker of disdain. "You've tidied up?" "A lovely, rustic property, Ms. Thorne," Mr. Davies said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, dry, and brief, a practiced gesture of dominance. "Eleanor has told me so much about your dedication to this land." The words were polite, but his tone was dismissive, as if complimenting a child's crayon drawing. I led them into the dining room, where the table was set for 3. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air. They both looked slightly surprised that I had prepared a meal. They had likely expected to conduct their business and leave, as if foreclosing on a property. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs. "I thought we could eat while we talk." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow but sat down, placing a slim leather portfolio on the table beside her. Davies sat opposite me, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and analytical. He was sizing me up, and I could tell he had already filed me away in a mental cabinet labeled unimportant, easily handled. "This is very quaint, Catherine," Eleanor began, unable to resist the dig. She opened her portfolio. "But let's get down to business. As you know, Omnigen is prepared to make a very generous offer for this property. We feel it's more than fair, considering the extensive work that will be required to bring the land up to code. She slid a document across the table. It was a formal purchase agreement. The final number at the bottom, a figure that might seem large to someone who didn't know the first thing about land value but was, in reality, an insult. Davies leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His voice was a smooth, persuasive baritone. Catherine, may I call you Catherine? What Eleanor is offering you is more than just a check. It's a new beginning. Omnigen isn't just a corporation. We are innovators. We are dedicated to solving some of humanity's greatest challenges. This facility will be at the forefront of agricultural science, developing sustainable crops to feed a growing world. He paused, his gaze intense. Frankly, your family's land is the perfect spot for our new headquarters. The right soil composition, access to water, it's ideal. He went on, painting a grand vision of Omnigen's humanitarian efforts. He spoke of their cutting-edge research, their Nobel laureate scientists. And then he made his first, fatal mistake. Our biggest push right now, our moonshot project, is in neuroregeneration, he said, his voice lowering with manufactured gravity. We are on the verge of a breakthrough that could effectively halt the progression of diseases like MS, Parkinson's, ALS. We have the team, we have the funding, we have the will, but we're missing one critical piece of the puzzle. He sighed, a theatrical gesture of frustration. A key compound. We've been trying to license a particular patent, but the inventor has chosen to remain anonymous, a ghost. It's holding everything up. It's been profoundly frustrating. I watched him, my face a carefully blank mask. I let him talk, letting him weave his web of corporate rhetoric and self-congratulation. Eleanor sat beside him, nodding along, her expression one of smug pride, as if she were personally responsible for every word he uttered. They were so confident, so wrapped up in their own narrative of power and importance. They had no idea they were sitting across from the ghost herself. When he finally finished, the silence stretched. I didn't look at the contract. I didn't respond to his speech. I just sat there, letting the quiet fill the room. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Eleanor's smirk widened. She mistook my silence for cowed acceptance. She thought she had won. "So, Catherine?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What do you say?" "The offer is final. Ready to sign and join the real world?" I met her gaze. Then I slowly, deliberately reached for the manila folder on the sideboard. I didn't open it. I simply slid it across the polished oak table, the faint whisper of paper on wood, the loudest sound in the room. It stopped directly in front of Mr. Davies. He looked at the folder, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Eleanor frowned, annoyed by the interruption to her victory lap. "What is that? More of your sentimental nonsense?" I ignored her. My eyes were locked on Davies. "Before we discuss your offer for my land," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I was wondering, is this the patent you're looking for?" He opened the folder. His professionally charming expression didn't just fade, it evaporated. The mask of the powerful CEO dissolved, replaced by a raw, unguarded shock. His eyes, wide with disbelief, scanned the single sheet of paper inside. The printed email from the university, detailing Omnigen's desperate multi-million-dollar inquiry to license patent C117 Apis. His gaze snapped up from the paper to my face, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles straining. "Where?" he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Where did you get this?" Eleanor leaned over, trying to see the paper. "What is it? What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. I finally turned my head and looked directly at my sister. The moment was here, the culmination of a lifetime of being underestimated. I let a small, genuine smile touch my lips. C117 Apis, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that felt brand new. The ghost patent your company is so desperate to find. I was wondering about the name. Do you think it's a coincidence? I didn't wait for an answer. C is for Catherine. 117 is the hive number just a few hundred yards from where we're sitting, where I first isolated the foundational peptide sequence, and Apis. I paused, letting the final word hang in the air between us, is Latin for bee. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The smugness, the confidence, the lifetime of casual superiority, it all crumbled in an instant, leaving behind a horrifying, vacant landscape of disbelief. She looked from my face to the paper in her boss's hand, then back to me, her mind frantically trying to connect two realities that she had always kept universes apart: Catherine the failure and the anonymous genius inventor her company was hunting. I turned my attention back to the stunned CEO. "You're not here to buy my farm, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, conversational tone that was more chilling than any shout. "The farm is not, and will never be, for sale. You are here in my home to beg for the license to my research. And looking at this document," I gestured to the purchase agreement for the land, "and then considering what your own people are saying my patent is worth, I have to say, your opening offer is deeply, deeply insulting." The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The ticking of the clock seemed to thunder in the stillness. Eleanor was ashen, her eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic horror. Davies was no longer a predator. He was prey, caught in a trap he hadn't even seen. All this time, they had looked at me and seen a relic of the past. They never imagined, not for a single second, that they were actually looking at their own future. The silence in the room was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. It was broken by Mr. Davies clearing his throat, a rough, scraping sound. His recovery was remarkable. The stunned corporate animal was already morphing, adapting to the new, terrifying landscape. The predatory charm was gone, replaced by an urgent, almost fawning sincerity. "Ms. Thorne, Catherine," he said, his voice strained. He pushed the worthless land purchase agreement aside as if it were contaminated. "Clearly, there has been a monumental misunderstanding, a catastrophic failure of communication on our part." He shot a venomous glance at Eleanor, who was still frozen, her face a mask of chalky disbelief. "I had no idea. No one at Omnigen had any idea." He was already trying to salvage the situation, his mind calculating new angles, new strategies. "This changes everything, of course. We are not just interested in your patent. We are interested in you, a partnership, a true collaboration. Forget this insulting offer." He waved a dismissive hand over the contract. "Let's talk about a real offer. A research directorship, a state-of-the-art laboratory built to your exact specifications, right here, if you like. Whatever you want. Name your price. We have the resources to make your work the global standard. We can change the world together." He was throwing everything at the wall, trying to see what would stick. Huge numbers, prestigious titles, unlimited resources. It was the kind of offer designed to dazzle, to overwhelm. But I wasn't the same person who had walked into that room an hour ago. The weight of their judgment was gone, and in its place was a crystalline clarity. It was Eleanor who finally cracked. A strangled sound escaped her throat, a mix of a sob and a gasp. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, you're lying. This is a trick. Some kind of elaborate joke." She turned to me, her eyes wild with a desperate, pleading confusion. "How could you? You're a beekeeper. You play in the dirt." The words were an echo of a lifetime of insults, but now they sounded pathetic, hollow. The foundations of her world, a world in which she was the smart one, the successful one, the superior one, had been pulverized. She looked at her boss, who was now looking at me with something approaching reverence, and the last vestiges of her composure shattered. I let her spiral, my own calm a stark contrast to her unraveling. I turned my gaze back to Davies, who was waiting, his entire body tensed for my response. I took a slow sip of water. "Here is what is going to happen, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice cool and measured. "Your company, acting through my sister, spent months trying to bully me, to intimidate me with legal threats, and to acquire my family home for pennies on the dollar, all while knowing its true strategic value to your operations. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a calculated, unethical business practice." He started to protest, but I held up a hand, and he fell silent. "You have my answer regarding the land. It is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Ever." I let that sink in. "As for my patent," I continued, "I might be willing to consider a licensing agreement. But I will not be negotiating with you tonight, and I certainly will not be negotiating with anyone who employs the kind of tactics your company has used." I shifted my gaze to my sister, who flinched as if I had physically struck her. "You will have your corporate counsel draft a real offer, a serious one, and send it to my attorney. We can begin discussions after you have terminated your current representation on this matter." The implication was clear, hanging in the air like an executioner's axe. Fire her. Then I spoke directly to Eleanor. My voice was no longer cold. It was soft, tinged with a deep, weary sadness. "And you," I said gently, "get out of my house." For Eleanor, that was the final blow. To be so thoroughly, completely dismissed. To be so humiliated in front of the man whose approval she had worked so hard to win. She stared at me, her face a mess of conflicting emotions. Rage, shame, utter devastation. Without another word, she stumbled back from the table, turned, and fled from the room, from the house, her hurried footsteps echoing on the porch before being swallowed by the night. Mr. Davies remained seated for a long moment, his face a grim mask. The master of the universe had been utterly outmaneuvered. He gave a single, curt nod of understanding. He knew he had no choice. He stood up, leaving the portfolio and the insulting contract on the table. "You'll be hearing from our legal department," he said, his voice flat. He turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the sudden, profound quiet of my home. I didn't move for a long time. I sat at my grandfather's table, the smell of the uneaten dinner growing cold. The silence was absolute. No ticking clock, no hum of a refrigerator. Just a deep, resonant stillness. I felt a tremor start in my hands, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally beginning to recede. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark shapes of the hives, standing like silent sentinels under the moon. A feeling washed over me, but it wasn't triumph. It wasn't the sweet taste of revenge I might have expected. It was release. A slow, deep, seismic release of a pressure I had been living under my entire life. The crushing weight of my family's judgment, the constant need to justify myself, the feeling of being unseen. It was gone. It had simply lifted, floating away into the dark night. I picked up my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, and dialed the only person in the world who would understand. "Anya?" I said when she answered. "Catherine, is everything all right?" A small laugh escaped me, the first real, unburdened laugh I'd had in years. "Yes," I said, looking out at my peaceful, protected world. "I think it is. It's done." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but a whirlwind I was now at the center of, not one I was being tossed around by. I hired a patent lawyer, a shark named Ms. Albright that Anya had recommended. a woman who specialized in intellectual property for the biotech industry and who looked at OmniGen's initial behavior with unconcealed disgust. The negotiations were swift and brutal. OmniGen, with their entire neuroregeneration program on the line, had zero leverage. The final agreement was astronomical. It wasn't just a licensing fee, it was a complete partnership on my terms. There was a signing bonus that made the original offer for my land look like pocket change. There were royalties that would ensure financial security for generations. But most importantly, there was the creation of the Thorne Institute for Apian Research. OmniGen would fund the entire thing, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to studying the therapeutic applications of natural compounds. And, at my insistence, it would not be built on my farm. OmniGen was required to purchase a separate 200-acre plot of commercial land 10 miles away. I would serve as the Institute's director with full, unimpeachable autonomy over its research and mission. My work would be protected, funded, and amplified, all without sacrificing my home. My grandparents' legacy was secure. The family fallout was, as expected, messy. My parents called a few days after the meeting, their voices a strange cocktail of awe, confusion, and desperate, clumsy attempts at backtracking. They had apparently heard a hysterical, disjointed version of events from Eleanor. "Catherine, dear," my mother began, her voice trembling slightly. "Eleanor told us something about your bees and her company. We had no idea, darling. Why didn't you ever tell us what you were working on?" The question was so perfectly them. It placed the blame for their ignorance squarely on my shoulders. The old me would have let it slide, would have absorbed the injustice. The new me did not. "I tried to tell you," I said calmly, my voice devoid of accusation. "Many times, over many years, you called it playing with bugs. You told me it was a hobby that had gotten out of control. You weren't interested in listening." A stunned silence met my words. The simple, unvarnished truth was a weapon they had no defense against. For the first time, I was setting the terms of our relationship. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stated the facts. The conversation ended with their stammered apologies and promises to do better. I knew the road ahead with them would be long. Their respect was new, fragile, and born of my success, not of a true change of heart. But it was a start, and it would be a relationship that now existed on my terms, within boundaries I would enforce. Eleanor was a different story. I heard through Ms. Albright that she hadn't been fired. Davies was too clever for that, as it would look like an admission of guilt. Instead, she was reassigned. Moved from her prestigious role in corporate acquisitions to a quiet, dead-end department in internal compliance. It was a public and humiliating demotion, a corporate exile. 2 months later, she sent me a text. "Can we meet? Please." We met at a neutral coffee shop in a town halfway between the farm and the city. She looked smaller, diminished. The sharp corporate armor was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The circles under her eyes told a story of sleepless nights. She stirred her coffee for a full minute before she could look at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The tears that welled in her eyes were real. "I am so sorry, Kat." I waited, knowing there was more. "It wasn't just the farm," she continued, finally meeting my gaze. "It was everything. My whole life, I did what was expected. I got the grades, the law degree, the job. I built this perfect life on a foundation of everyone else's approval. And I was miserable." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "And you just went your own way. You didn't care what they thought. You had this quiet passion. I didn't get it, so I belittled it. I was jealous," she admitted, the word a painful confession. "Not of the farm. I was jealous that you had something that was truly yours, something you loved. All I ever had was what Mom and Dad wanted me to have. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. The raw vulnerability of it chipped away at the wall I had built around my heart. I didn't offer her easy forgiveness. The wounds were too deep for a simple bandage, but I listened. And for the first time, I saw not just my antagonist, but my sister, a woman who was just as trapped by our family's expectations as I had been, just in a different kind of cage. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. And in that small cafe, amidst the clatter of cups and the smell of coffee, a new, fragile beginning started to take shape. A year later, I stood on a catwalk overlooking the main laboratory of the Thorne Institute. Below me, a team of brilliant young scientists, people I had handpicked, were working, their focused energy a familiar, comforting hum not unlike my hives. The building was beautiful, all sustainable wood and glass, designed to let in the light. But my home was still the old farmhouse. My heart was still with my bees. My life was bigger now, more complex, but its core was unchanged. I still wore my old boots, my fingernails were still often stained with dirt, and I still smelled faintly of smoke and honey. I had learned that being underestimated wasn't an insult, it was an advantage. Their dismissal had been a cloak of invisibility, giving me the freedom to work, to dream, to create without scrutiny or interference. They had been so busy looking down on me that they never saw me rising. In the end, the land they saw as worthless held the secret to their most fervent ambitions. And the daughter they saw as a failure was the one who held the key, not just to a scientific breakthrough, but to a truth they had long forgotten. That value isn't something that can be bought or sold. It's something that is cultivated, quietly and patiently, in the rich soil of your own passion. They thought they knew my story, but they had only ever read the cover. The real story was in the work, in the love, and in the quiet resilience of a spirit they had tried and failed to break. What I want you to take away from my story is this: never, ever let anyone else define your worth. The world is full of people who will try to put you in a box, to label you, to reduce you to something they can understand. Your value exists independently of their recognition. Sometimes the people who believe in you the least are the ones who motivate you the most, pushing you to prove not just them, but yourself. Wrong. Now I want to hear from you. Share your own story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or had your dreams dismissed? How did you handle it, and how did you find the strength to believe in yourself? Your story could be the one that someone else needs to hear tonight. And please, if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening with an open heart. I wish you all the strength and clarity you need to cultivate your own passions, no matter who is or isn't watching. Remember that family is ultimately defined by love and respect, not just by blood.